Hey, boys and girls, I thought we'd talk about 1981 today, as in the best albums of that year, since I had done a while back the best albums of 1980, or my favorite albums of 1980. So it only made sense to move on to the next year and do 1981. And so, like 1980, it was an incredibly rich period for music and great music, great albums. So I couldn't just narrow it down to only 10 albums. I had to go top 25. But I'm going to break this up into 5 videos of 5 albums each, so it don't have a 3-hour video. And so yeah, it always kind of surprises me a little bit that on the VC you see a lot of people talking about 70s and 80s albums and the big groups from those eras, and deservedly so because, well, deservedly so. Um, Obviously, and 60s is my favorite period of music overall, and but right behind that would probably be that period from say 76, 77 to about 84 or so. Just a really diverse, interesting, fun, great, inventive period for music. And unfortunately, a lot of the bands, a lot of the albums that were just top form from that period have been forgotten. Or never really got much acclaim at the time because radio didn't play a lot of the new bands and just a whole lot of factors that take too long to get into now. But so I rarely see people talking about any or some of these bands on the VC, which is a shame because I think they're really good. And everything on my list is not totally obscure bands that no one's heard of, but some of them are, I think. And so it's a good chance to maybe find out some about some new music you might like, because I'll just got to go to YouTube now. You don't have to go buy the albums like we did back in the old days, and just go to YouTube and bring up the artist or the album and you can listen for free. It just costs a little bit of your time, and so I don't know that anybody's actually going to do that or not, but um, you know, there's just a suggestion. Of course, my good friend, me and Mr. Mayo Joe, you know, I only listen to the Beatles and Joan Jett and nobody else, and by God, I'm not going to do it because I might like something and that'd be terrible. Uh, I'm kidding with you, Joe. Anyway, start with number 25 on my list is Tin Drum by the band Japan, and this is the 80s, among other things, is famous for synth pop music and bands. That's what these guys are, uh, sort of, kind of, and not really a genre of music that I'm overly in love with, just because it started off interesting in the late 70s, early 80s, and then it quickly devolved into just sort of boring Depeche Mode, Pet Shop Boys, those kind of lame John Hughes movie soundtrack type songs that were all over the radio that didn't have much substance or spirit in them. But in the early days, you had some really good examples of this stuff, and this is one of them. So synth pop, like I said, kind of avant-garde music, art rock, but accessible, more or less. Has some touches of Middle Eastern and Asian music throughout the album. There's a song on here called Ghosts, which actually went to number 5 on the UK charts back in '81, which is funny because it's no way what you would think of as a normal pop song or accessible radio friendly song. And it shows you how exciting the early '80s were, because something like that could probably only have happened, well, more or less could only have happened back in '80, '81. Wouldn't happen today for sure. It's a good song. It's just not something you would expect to show up on the commercial top 40. And so yeah, it's a good album. The reason I put it at number 25 is that it does have a few bits of filler and slow parts. There are some parts in here that sort of feel to me like music you hear in the background when you're sitting in a Chinese buffet restaurant. And I do have to be in the mood for this. It's not something that I'd pull out and play every day or even a whole lot. But when I'm in the mood, it's sort of the only thing that'll do. But there's enough good stuff in here to make it worth mentioning and make it worthwhile. Um, and if you like the synth pop stuff, that's the good stuff before it just sort of became top 40 junk. This is a good one to look into. All right, so we go to number 24. Here's a really obscure band that you guys probably never seen or heard of. So no, this is Tattoo You by the Rolling Stones, and this, in my opinion, the last good album they ever made. A couple albums that came out after it were Undercover and I forget the name of the one after that one where they're all dressed up like the Miami Vice characters. Pretty crappy albums that had one or two good songs on it, but this is the last really good, solid album they ever made, in my opinion. And it is a pretty good one, though. This is no patch on their '60s work, but it's probably about as good as Some Girls, a little better than Emotional Rescue, better than most of their '70s albums, which is kind of funny given the fact that a lot of these songs were originally written and or recorded back in the early to mid '70s, and they needed an album because they were going on tour, so they just pulled a lot of old songs off and dusted them off and got this album together, and somehow it works. I think there's several of the songs were new and written around 1980, 81 for this, but yeah, it's just a solid album. It's got "Start Me Up," which is one of my least favorite Rolling Stones songs of all. Not a terrible song, but it just sounds like a third-rate band trying to sound like the Rolling Stones to my ears. But the rest of this is pretty good stuff. Especially like "Waiting on a Friend" because it's one of the rare times when Mick Jagger actually sort of lets his guard down and shows a little bit of true emotion. Um, and Hang Fire, Little TNA, Neighbors is goofy but fun. Uh, just a just a pretty good Rolling Stones album, and in my book, it was all over after this. They should have broke up, but they didn't. Uh, so what do we got? Number 23 is the Au Pairs playing with a different sex. Uh, this is just kind of a post-punk, funk rock. Got a nice groove. Kind of reminds me of Gang of Four sound if you know who they are. This is a limited edition that I got. It's on like Pepto Bismol pink vinyl, numbered edition too, 302 of 500 copies. But yeah, got a nice percussion and bass throughout the songs. Um the singer reminds me of the lead singer from the Motels. It's just in sound, uh, just sort of a spiky punk funk album, good music, and so there's that. And number 22, Bowwowwow with what's that title? Sea Jungle, go join our gang. Yeah, City All Over, go ape crazy. Which got to be one of the best album titles out there. And yeah, this is a lot of fun. This actually doesn't have the big hit "I Want Candy" on it, but it does have "Go Wild in the Country," which is kind of a minor hit for them. A lot of if you like "I Want Candy," you'd like this. It's pretty much the Bow Wow Wow sound throughout much of the album. It's the African drum rhythms, the spaghetti western music, just sort of the dance music, sort of punk, post-punk, fun, silly, goofy, but it's different, just like the early '80s were. A lot of good, great, fun songs on here. Chihuahua is a great one. Uh, Line, I'm a puppet in a band. I'm a I'm a puppet in I'm a rock and roll puppet in a band called Bow Wow Wow. She sings, just fun stuff. And really, there's only one or two Duff tracks on this album. But again, if you like I Want Candy, you'll like this. If you don't really like that, you probably won't like this. But just a fun album, good stuff. And then we end this video with selection number 21, which, trying to read my notes here, I kind of traded my um, numbering around, and so it's a little confusing. Anyway, Youth, excuse me, Youth of America by the Wipers. This band was apparently a big influence on Kurt Cobain and Nirvana, but don't let that stand in your way of enjoying it, because they don't sound anything like that band, thankfully. Um, this is just sort of a punk rock, rock and roll, sort of bounce around the room while you're listening to it, with a lot of melodic dashes in between. Uh, Funny thing is at this time, punk rock bands, it was kind of to do the, you know, it's kind of a reaction against prog rock and those bands doing side-long album tracks, in place of that doing like 2-3 minute songs. These guys actually do songs a little bit longer. They don't do a whole album side, but they do, 5-6 minute songs, but it works. A lot of nice guitar throughout, a lot of nice percussion. When It's Over almost sounds like spy theme action movie. That's one of the songs on here, but they're really not a bad song on here. I think there's maybe one that's just sort of okay. But if you like just sort of upbeat, bounce around, rock and roll punk, uh, get you in the mood for Friday night type music, good stuff here. So anyway, that's 25 to 21, and I will be back and do the rest of the videos here sometime shortly.